Hello, and welcome back to Always the Horizon by Murdoch, as read by Livid Productions. Chapter 11. The Swamps of Sadness. We buried Liu Bei properly despite our grievances with him, for he was still a man, unlike his Semitic goblin ally, which we left to rot in the sun for the carrion birds. I do not believe that even ravens would dare eat goblin meat. I have learned something from that last battle, Ryder. It is difficult to deploy one's hate when one lacks sufficient reason. Communism was brought to the Chinese. It was the Semitic impulse that made its way into the Orient like a cancer. Look at the great proletarian cultural revolution that devastated their own continuum. How much of their world was lost forever because of that Semitic mimetic poison. Nearly 50 million people were destroyed in Mao Zedong's great leap forward. I wish to honor Liu Bei, for I have learned from him that I am ill-equipped without a blade. It was kind of him to leave me his weapon, but before long, I shall take up another. Our sacred combat, despite my wounds, will only increase my capabilities. It is, as they say, that which does not kill us makes us stronger. We continue our journey through the plains until we arrive at the forest that leads to the Swamp of Sadness. Just as we begin walking into the woodland, we hear a familiar voice calling out to us. Wait, sacred clown! From over the hill, we see him, my old friend from the pub, the atheist. Finally, he reaches our position. As he moves forward, attempting to catch his breath, he wheezes. My friend, I cannot let you go into that swamp and face that demon, for you know already that those who enter never return. Please, my friend, realize that your newfound religion, this purpose that you speak of, is only arbitrarily filling your own subjective void. In truth, the void cannot be filled. She, that witch, nihilism, lurks in the swamp ahead, and it is said she yearns for the hopelessness of men. I stare at him for a moment, and then retort, but I am not hopeless, or even filled with hope, for I know that my aim is true. I know that the gods will be there, watching and aiding my actions. With a bewildered expression, he whispers, The gods? I turn away from him and look into the dark forest ahead. Beings, phenomena. As I have said before, if it is true that being yearns to know itself, then at all times I am aided by its inner workings. Faith and hope are useless against that wretched hag. Only absolute resolve will bring light back into this dreaded swamp. Come with me, my old friend. The hag has already made her way into your heart, dominating your spirit. Let us today endeavor to fell this vile creature. I begin walking forward. Come along, Ryder. The atheist looks right, then left, sighs, then reluctantly begins to follow. As we venture deeper into the forest, springy peat gives way to marshy bog, and a sinister mist begins to set in from all sides. In the distance we see the slowly growing light from a lantern. As we pass through ever denser thicket, suddenly we hear a voice from afar calling out, Go back. There's nothing for you here. We continue to trudge forward until we find ourselves face to face with an old man sitting in some type of boat, filled with books and newspapers. He cries out to us, I am the pessimist, and I know this swamp better than any man. I came here to find satisfaction. However, satisfaction cannot be found. For as soon as one finds quality in this life, he eventually grows bored with it, tosses it away, and ventures to find some new goal, all in the vain pursuit of satisfaction. I give no pause and reply, verily, it is well that man was equipped with such tendencies, for if he were to remain in one place, satisfied for too long, he surely would forget the chase of the sun. It is in the hunt that the new people will find satisfaction, for satisfaction is the mountain which can never be surmounted, yet must be endlessly climbed. The old man frowns. Truly, I have been here for days, or has it been weeks? What year is it again? I reply, you will soon be free of this place, pessimist, for my companions and I seek the head of the hag nihilism. The pessimist snorts and scornfully cries out, I said go back, you damned fool. There is no hope in this place. There is a crash of water. We turn to see the atheist, stumbling through knee-high mud. This dreaded place! Now I'm covered in the muck! The old man in the boat grins. It's just started, you dimwit. This place isn't for ya, and the deeper you go, the more you will sink. I go to grab the atheist to help him up to higher ground. I look him in the eyes and say, stay close. I turn to look at the pessimist and call out, where is the sacred sword that lies in this swamp? The pessimist crosses his arms as he scoffs. The sacred sword? I know nothing of such myths. We carry on into the swamp. The pessimist continues to cry out, turn back, you fools. This is no place for you. His echoes through the trees until it can no longer be heard. What feels like hours pass as we venture forward. The atheist whispers as he lingers behind us. Do you hear that? I pause and turn to look at him, saying, hear what? The atheist whispers back. The sounds of the swamp. I hear no animals, no birds or insects. There's nothing. It is a haunting silence. He is right, as only the sounds of our footsteps in the mud can be heard. We must keep moving, I reply. I am about to keep moving when we hear a strange sound. The atheist whispers, did you hear that? It sounds like the weeping of a little child. My eyes widen and I call to him. Do not dwell on it. We must keep moving. Our party makes its way through this forsaken swamp, passing through thicket and the muck. We finally decide to rest, as we have traveled for hours. Yet the swamp has remained a consistent twilight. Is it day or night, I wonder? The atheist sits on a rock and begins to speak. Are we lost? Perhaps the old hag is just a myth. Are wet socks and boots covered in mud her greatest arsenal of the dark arts? He begins laughing, then pauses. He raises his hand to point behind me. He whispers, look. I turn my head, and to my horror, the little girl from the graveyard stands just a few feet away. I turn my head back to the atheist and cry out, do not talk to it. The little girl begins to weep.
Please, can you help me? I've been lost in this swamp for a very long time.
The atheist looks to me and states, you mean that is she, the Black Witch? I say nothing as my eyes remain fixed on his. Rider, we must be swift, for the creature has found us. I grab the atheist by his arm and say, we need to move. We quickly get our gear together and continue to trudge through the muck. She continues to follow us, though she oddly has no trouble finding firm footing.
Why do you men not aid little girls? Is it because you are selfish? That does not make sense. I mean, the heart of humanity is selfishness, you know. Mothers really only care for their babies because they share the same genetic material. Underneath all her supposed love is simply the desire to indefinitely carry on her own genes. Doesn't sound very pretty when we look at it that way, does it?
Hours pass as we move through thorns and deep water. Still, all the while, the little girl follows, periodically asking questions, looking for a way in. Suddenly the atheist calls out, "Can we take a break again? I think I've injured my leg with how many times I've tripped here in this damned swamp." He sits on a log and removes a boot. The little girl makes her way near us, for she is very curious about her new friends. The atheist looks to me, then back to the little girl as he says, "So this is what we have feared for so long? This is the hag nihilism?" He begins to laugh as he pulls off his sock, saying, "So let me get this straight. A little girl with pestering questions, wet boots, and a busted knee are what has kept Western mankind lost in the abyss. We should have come here sooner, for the great black witch nihilism is but a myth." The atheist puts his boots back on and makes his way next to the little girl. He bends down next to her and says, "You see, little one, the pursuit of happiness was always enough. I knew it. What brings a man joy is enough to give one's life purpose." He begins laughing as he states, "This here friend of mine thinks you're something awful, but in truth you are as harmless as a kitten. Let it be said that happiness conquered nihilism today." He stands back up and begins walking his way towards our position, when suddenly the little girl remarks with a twisted grin,
Yes, you are a very wise man indeed. For I'm sure if Erica were still alive, she would completely agree with you.
The atheist pauses, then slowly turns around. How do you know that name?" The girl stares menacingly into his eyes.
She was your sister, correct? I'm sure if she still lived, she would agree with you that the pursuit of happiness was enough. But I suppose she doesn't exist anymore, so we'll never know.
The atheist's gaze remains on her, yet he says nothing.
It's all right. I know you have a lot of guilt for what happened on that night. You know, when those men came to your farm, when they did what they did with her.
The atheist's eyes widen as he whispers, "How do you know of such things?" The little girl's grin widens.
You don't have to feel guilty anymore. When those men came in the night, when they raped your sister, you hid yourself because you were afraid. Don't you know that your fear was just a survival mechanism? Had those two men found you, perhaps you'd be dead too. It was best that she died, rather than you. Don't you agree? You were given so many more years to pursue your great task, to gather as much happiness as possible.
Suddenly the atheist begins to weep. He looks back to me, and back to the little girl. How does she know? I cut him off. Do not listen to her, atheist. She wants to get inside your head. You fool! Shut her out! The little girl walks closer to the atheist until she is within arm's reach.
You shouldn't harbor any hatred for those two men. After all, they were seeking their own euphoria. How could you argue that those men's happiness is in any way less valid than your own? Don't you remember how happy they looked, taking turn after turn after turn after turn after turn with her?
The atheist smacks the little girl's face. He stands back in shock at his own actions. The little girl begins laughing as she clasps her cheeks. She turns her eyes back to his once again.
Yes, it was just matter, penetrating matter. Tell me, in those dark years of your youth, when you buried that pain with alcohol and drugs, were you not still attaining your goals? Those opiates that bring such ecstasy are really no different than anything else that makes a man happy. Isn't it strange that you were able to acquire so much happiness, but never felt satisfaction?
I walk up and put my hand on the atheist's shoulder as I say, my dear friend, you must disengage from her and continue forward." We begin to move when suddenly the atheist trips and begins to sink. We rush to him, grabbing a hold on his arm as we struggle to keep him up. How strange that we continue to have firm footing right where he sinks. I cry out to the atheist, "You must get her out of your mind. Hold on!" The atheist puts little effort into keeping himself from being submerged. The little girl begins to cackle.
All those years you tried to find purpose and happiness for nothing. You knew all along that everything's a big nothing. You tried to find purpose from New Age religions to the same old Abrahamic song. Eventually, you found comfort in the notion that you could attain knowledge from the material sciences. But look at you. You're still that mound of bacteria, searching for dopamine and serotonin. Do you see how utterly absurd it all really is?
I leap up and pull out the Jean Madal blade. In an instant, I bring it crashing down on her neck. As soon as the blade makes impact, it is shattered into pieces. She turns to look at me and states,
"How strange that I cannot read your mind. I'm not sure if I've ever even seen men this far out in the marsh before. You are not like your companion who sinks. Why have you made your way into my swamp?"
I look to the ground and see my dear old friend sinking further, even as you, Ryder, struggle to keep him up. I fall back to my knees, putting my hands on his face, just as the muck reaches his neck. I cry out, "Don't you remember what I told you back at the pub about our purpose? Please, you have to remember." He sinks further, slowly, until just before he is completely submerged, he whispers, "It is but a void," and with that slips into the abyss. The atheist was made no more. Tears fall from my eyes, but we have no time to mourn. We must relentlessly continue forward. Hours pass as nihilism, wearing the mask of a familiar little girl, continues to probe our minds. The further we make our way into the swamp, the heavier the fog becomes, and the more the little girl becomes impatient with our silence. She barks out,
"Why are you here? What are you looking for? Don't you know whatever you find will not fulfill you? Go to sleep now. Lay on the ground and let the cold, forgiving waters of marsh embrace you."
Suddenly, she turns her eyes towards you, Ryder. Her face lights up with curiosity.
"The knowing? What is the knowing? Are you two here to find truth? Do you not know that I was born from that endeavor? Am I not what you seek?"
She scowls.
"Turn around now and take back with you the great truth to your loved ones. Tell them that nothing really matters, and they too can make this swamp their grave. Yes, let my swamp be humanity's graveyard."
Her eyes remain on you, Ryder, as we continue to push forward, until suddenly She whispers,
"A sacred sword?"
and in an instant, a darkness envelops us both, a darkness of both mind and spirit, as if an unbearable weight has been placed upon our shoulders. Now this dreaded witch knows why we have come to this place. She knows she is in danger, and will be relentless with her torment. We continue forward as she screams in our ears.
"Men can know nothing. Why do you seek knowing? It is meaningless. Seek where you are. You are no more than bacteria. Do you seek knowledge for happiness? Why do you not sink? Sink. Sink.
We walk now in knee-deep mud that is nearly impossible to trudge through. However, today we must do the impossible. Each step requires an absolute resolve in order to maintain oneself from sinking into the swamp's embrace. There, on the horizon, I see a faint glow. The sacred sword is not far. The little girl runs directly in front of me as she barks.
I see in your thoughts, Aphrodite. Do you not realize that love is just a combination of chemicals to get genes to pass to the next generation? That no one really cares about anyone. That love is no different than any other phenomena. It is just the laws of physics.
I smile, looking to the little girl, and say, "Then it is well and good that nature saw fit to make love one of her laws." I continue pressing forward. The little girl maintains her gaze as she reads our minds, slowly trying to break down our worldview. She grows ever more desperate to find a way to sink our purpose, that purpose that shields us from her domain, before it can be used to wield the sacred weapon. For a purpose built on faith or hope alone would not be sufficient. Only a purpose built on absolute resolve would give power to that long-forgotten sword that lies buried in this forsaken swamp. Suddenly she looks to you and speaks.
If being is generating towards knowing, then why did the German fail in his mission to destroy the obfuscator during the Second World War?
We both halt, as if the mud had locked us in place. The little girl calls out again.
If the Aryan is being's greatest lens, then why allow the obfuscator a century of power over the world? Do you not see? It is just a nothing. You are merely trying to romanticize something that gives your life greater meaning. You Aryans and the Semites are merely two forms of bacteria competing over resources. Do you not see that your very desire to bring life to the European continuum is merely a desire for replication and energy acquisition? Your species desires new horizons for the gain of materials necessary to replicate, just as fire burns the forest. Mankind devours energy.
I feel weak, Ryder, like some black magic surrounds me completely. I am filled with a deep apathy that saturates my skin and bones. However, I begin moving forward again as I call out. The German had to fail in his attempt to destroy the obfuscator, for the Aryans had to universally live under Weimar conditions in order to reawaken and unite them. The failed artist had to become a martyr. The European continuum had to be put into an environment where we all saw the machinations of the Jew at once, where we would suffer from communism, where we would all see our children's futures taken away from them. Only then could we move past primitive patriotism. Only then could we become the new people. I look back to you, Ryder, and see that you no longer move, for you too have begun to sink. You have to keep moving. We have a purpose. Do not forget what you have learned. Being yearns to know itself, to feel itself, to be. We have to be, Ryder. We have to be. I turn away from you and begin moving towards the sacred sword, which lies only a few steps away. The mud has become like cement, each step requiring all my strength. The little girl walks up to me and whispers,
"You can't even convince your own friend. And yet you would think you could convince an entire race of man? Dwell on that, my friend. For man is such a beast that even if he is to be given truth, he would only shit and piss on it. He can know nothing. That is reality. That this reality is a nothing. When he dies, there is nothing. Your pursuit to save your people is just another coping mechanism to deal with my existence."
I fall to the ground, my left hand and knees submerged in the muck. With my right hand, I desperately reach out to the sacred sword's hilt. In vain. With all of my strength, I attempt to pull my arm from the muck, but it is useless. I have begun to sink too. I reach to the broken Jean Madel blade on my belt and begin cutting into my arm. I will free myself of this swamp one way or the other. I laugh to myself. I have been one-armed before. A little girl runs up, kicking the blade from my hands, and screeches,
"What a fool you are! What logic is this? You struggle like a wild beast. Are you not man? An animal endowed with reason? Just sink and accept reality for what it is."
I begin to weep like mad. If I cannot even convince you, Ryder, how can I hope to convince the world? Have I begun to develop hope and hopelessness? Have I lost that surety that I brought with me? Here where the animals refuse to congregate and make beautiful children, where thorns but no flowers line the horizon. Why have I led my companions here, into this accursed swamp? I have turned us all into just another part of the abyss.